My name is Harper Lawson, and at 38, I thought I had already survived the worst of my family's cruelty. But nothing prepared me for the moment my father stood up at our Thanksgiving dinner, raised his glass, and handed me a neatly wrapped box with a smile that wasn't a smile at all. 27 relatives watched as I opened it, and the room fell into a silence so thick I could feel it in my chest. Inside was a DNA test kit. Then he said the 7 words that made every pair of eyes turn toward me like a spotlight I never asked for. "Prove you're even my daughter, Harper." People gasped. A fork hit a plate. My mother froze with her hand halfway to her mouth. And Dylan, my younger brother, the one who'd been praised since birth as the true Lawson heir, laughed like it was the funniest joke he'd ever heard. I sat there, heat building behind my eyes, but I refused to let them see me break. I'd spent decades being treated like the outsider, the mistake, the one who should be grateful for scraps of attention. I wasn't giving them tears on top of humiliation. So I looked right at my father and thanked him for the gift. My voice didn't even shake. Then I turned to Dylan and said if this was about family clarity, then he should take a test too. The laughter died on his face. He didn't expect that. Neither did my father. But Richard Lawson had an audience, and his ego never backed down when all those relatives and business partners were watching. He tried brushing it off until one of his longtime associates said it seemed fair. That alone pushed him into a corner, and he finally agreed, insisting it was just to shut down nonsense once and for all. Dylan huffed and shrugged as if it were no big deal, but I saw the flicker in his eyes. Confidence mixed with something else, maybe fear, maybe doubt, but I didn't know what it meant then. I only knew something in my father's voice whenever he talked about real Lawson blood had always felt heavier than normal favoritism. Like he needed it to be true. Like he needed Dylan to be his proof of something. For years, I'd lived with that pressure. The construction company he built was spoken about like his firstborn child, and Dylan was always the golden boy chosen to inherit it. I was the one who worked hard, earned every achievement, and still got treated like a guest at my own family's table. But that night, holding that DNA kit, something in me clicked. All the whispers, the cold looks, the emotional distance, they weren't random. They were symptoms of a secret my family had been carrying for too long. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to find out the truth. Growing up in the Lawson family always felt like living in someone else's house. Everything revolved around my father's company, Lawson Construction Group, a business he valued more than anything else. He talked about it like it was his first child, the one he actually cared for. Anytime someone mentioned success or legacy, he pointed straight to Dylan, reminding everyone that Dylan would one day run the entire empire. It didn't matter that the company was worth millions or that our family depended on its reputation. What mattered was that Dylan fit the story my father liked to tell. I was never part of that story. I worked hard, got good grades, finished a computer science degree, and built a solid career for myself. But at home, none of that meant anything. Whenever I shared a win, my father shrugged it off or found a way to minimize it. If I earned an award, he said it wasn't relevant to real work. If I got promoted, he said tech jobs were unstable. It was like he refused to see that I was capable of anything important. Meanwhile, Dylan could barely make it through school without help. He skipped assignments, scraped by in classes, and still ended up with a title at the company the moment he turned 21. It didn't matter if he lacked experience or interest. He got the office, the salary, and the respect without working for any of it. My father bragged about him nonstop, calling him the future of Lawson Construction, as if it were already written and no one else had a chance. Family gatherings made the difference between us even clearer. Birthdays, holidays, any event, Dylan received expensive gifts, long speeches, and applause. I was given things like notebooks, kitchen items, or gift cards with no thought behind them. The comments that came with them hurt more than the gifts themselves. It was always something like, "You'll find a use for it," or "This is more practical for someone like you." It felt like a reminder that I didn't belong where the real celebrations happened. My mother, Elaine, never stopped any of it. She smiled, nodded, and agreed with the rest of the family when they lifted Dylan up and pushed me aside. She didn't say anything cruel, but her silence spoke louder than any insult. She followed my father's lead completely, treating Dylan like the golden child and treating me like an extra in their picture-perfect narrative. If I ever hinted that the difference hurt me, she brushed it off and said I was imagining things or being sensitive. Over time, the pattern became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just favoritism. It felt like my father wanted a reason to exclude me. The way he looked at me sometimes, distant, irritated, uncomfortable, made it seem like he was trying to convince himself of something. As I got older, I realized he wasn't just choosing Dylan over me. He was desperately hanging on to the idea that Dylan was the only child who truly carried his blood, and that I was only present because he had no choice. I didn't understand why he clung to that idea so tightly, but deep down, I sensed that it wasn't just pride. It was fear. Something about the truth scared him, and he acted like keeping me at a distance would protect whatever story he needed to believe.
When Dylan called me after meeting with our father and the family attorney, his voice carried that same smug tone he used whenever he believed he'd won something. He didn't even bother with small talk. He jumped straight into bragging about how Dad had updated his will and how it finally put everything in place. I didn't ask for details, but he gave them anyway, enjoying every second of it. According to him, the company, the properties, and most of the investments, basically everything our father owned, were set to go to him. He sounded proud, like he'd earned any of it. When I calmly asked what my part was, he said I'd get only a small portion and added a comment about how it made sense. He didn't hide his satisfaction. After the call ended, my phone buzzed again, this time with an email from Martin Cole, our longtime estate attorney. He sent me a summary of the changes, something he always did out of courtesy. I opened it expecting to see the usual imbalance, but the wording made me stop. The will now named Dylan as my sole biological son and gave him 85% of everything. My share was the remaining 15%, and even that came with a restriction. I couldn't sell it for 10 years. It wasn't the money or the percentage that bothered me. I had built my own career and supported myself for years. It was that specific phrase, sole biological son. Those 3 words pulled at the back of my mind like a loose thread. I'd known for years that my father favored Dylan, but this felt different. It felt purposeful, like he needed it written down in a legal document to prove something. It didn't make sense why he'd go out of his way to include those words unless he had doubts he didn't want anyone to question. I reread the email, trying to understand why the wording mattered so much to him. Something about it made my stomach twist, not because I felt hurt by it, but because it hinted at something deeper. It sounded less like a statement of fact and more like a defensive claim. Almost like he wanted protection against a truth he didn't want to face. Around the same time, I noticed my mother acting strange whenever the will came up in conversation. If Dylan mentioned it, she stiffened. If my father said anything about heritage, legacy, or blood, she shifted in her seat. She never looked directly at me. Her hands would fidget, or she'd suddenly find something to clean or straighten, anything to avoid meeting my eyes. It wasn't subtle. It was the kind of nervousness someone carries when they know more than they want to admit. She avoided the word biological entirely. If anyone used it, she changed the subject so quickly it felt forced. Her behavior only made the phrase echo louder in my mind. I couldn't figure out what exactly was being protected, but it was clear that the will wasn't just an updated document. It was a clue, one that pointed toward a secret my family had quietly guarded for years. And for the first time, I began to wonder if the truth had less to do with me and everything to do with Dylan. Thanksgiving at the Lawson estate was always a large event, but that year it felt heavier than usual. The house in Westport was filled with relatives, business partners, and longtime friends of my father. People were laughing, eating, and catching up, but beneath all the noise there was the familiar tension I always felt at these gatherings. I tried to stay quiet and blend into the background, the way I usually did, but my father had other plans long before dinner even began. When everyone was seated, Richard stood up with his glass raised. He loved giving speeches, especially ones that highlighted his success. This time, his words circled around family, heritage, and the importance of carrying on the Lawson name. He placed a hand on Dylan's shoulder and called him his real son, the one who would continue the legacy. I felt the sting, but I kept my expression steady. Most people just nodded, used to hearing him talk that way. After the toast, he announced that he wanted to hand out early Christmas gifts. Dylan's box was large and decorated. When he opened it, everyone could see the luxury watch inside. People clapped as my father proudly called him the future CEO. Then Richard turned to me and handed over a small package. I opened it slowly, and the room quieted the moment the DNA test kit came into view. He made a loud joke about finally clearing up old rumors, pretending it was lighthearted, but the tone behind it was sharp. The reaction around the table was immediate. My mother's glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. A few people stared at me with wide eyes, unsure how to react. Dylan let out a laugh, obviously enjoying the moment. I felt embarrassed for a second, but I pushed the feeling down. Instead of responding with anger or letting myself fall apart, I took the test kit and placed it neatly beside my plate. Then I asked my father if Dylan would be taking one as well, since he was so focused on keeping family records accurate. The question caught him off guard. He tried to brush it away, insisting it wasn't necessary. Before he could shut it down completely, Greg Shaw, one of his closest business partners for decades, spoke up and said it would be fair for both siblings to take the test. That put my father in a corner. With so many people watching, he couldn't back out without looking suspicious. Dylan rolled his eyes and said the whole thing was ridiculous, but he agreed. He truly believed nothing would ever threaten his position in the family. My father gave a tight smile, clearly irritated but forced to accept the idea. I kept my voice calm as I said that the results should be processed at a certified lab, not some random service, and that they should be shared publicly at the company's upcoming gala. I wanted everything to be clear, official, and undeniable. People started whispering after that, but the decision had already been made. The moment Richard agreed, something in the room shifted. For the first time in years, I felt like I had taken back a small piece of power my father had always tried to keep from me. I didn't know what the results would reveal, but I knew one thing for sure. My family could no longer hide behind their comfortable lies. A few days after Thanksgiving, I came home from work to find my mother standing outside my apartment door. She looked pale and nervous, clutching her purse like she was afraid it would slip from her hands. She hadn't called or texted. She just showed up, something she had never done in all the years I'd lived on my own. The moment I opened the door, she rushed inside, as if someone had been following her. I could tell right away that something was terribly wrong. She didn't sit down at first. She paced the small living room, wiping her eyes and trying to speak, but every time she opened her mouth, her voice cracked. After a few minutes, she finally stopped and asked me to cancel the DNA tests. Her tone was desperate, almost pleading. She said some things didn't need to be uncovered, that families survived because certain truths stayed hidden. I stood there quietly, confused by how shaken she was. I had never seen my mother like that. When I asked her why she wanted me to stop the tests, she broke down completely. She sank onto the couch and covered her face with her hands. Between sobs, she admitted something I never expected to hear from her. More than 35 years ago, while my father was away on a long project in another state, she had an affair. It happened only once, but it was with someone who had been in our lives for decades, Greg Shaw, my father's former CFO and a close family friend. The same man who had spoken up at Thanksgiving when I insisted on Dylan being tested. I felt like the ground shifted under my feet. I didn't interrupt her. I just listened. She explained that during that time, Richard had been gone for months, leaving her alone with a young marriage and growing loneliness. Greg had been kind, supportive, and present in a way my father wasn't. When Dylan was born not long after, she convinced herself it was easier to believe he was Richard's child. Everyone said Dylan resembled my father, and she held on to that idea because the alternative terrified her. But she admitted she always carried doubt. She told me she stayed quiet because she feared losing her marriage, her home, and the life she had built. She also confessed that her guilt grew stronger each year, and it was one of the reasons she never stood up for me whenever my father put me down. She didn't know how to fight for one child while hiding a secret about the other. Hearing her say that hurt more than I expected. For years, I had wondered why she never stepped in when things got out of hand. Now I understood she had been protecting herself more than anyone else. She begged me again to call off the tests, insisting that revealing the truth would tear the entire family apart. She said Richard would never recover from the betrayal, and Dylan would be devastated. I sat down across from her and thought about the years I spent being treated like I didn't belong. Every insult, every cold shoulder, Every moment where I felt like an outsider in my own home, they all came rushing back. I wasn't trying to destroy anything. I just wanted fairness. I wanted honesty. And I wanted to stop being the one who carried the weight of other people's choices. So I told her I couldn't cancel the tests. The truth was already moving toward us, and stepping away wouldn't fix anything. For once, I chose myself, even if it meant everything else might fall apart. The envelope from Genetron Labs arrived on a cold morning, delivered by a courier who asked for my signature before handing it over. I stood inside my apartment for a long moment, staring at the sealed document. I already knew there was no turning back, but holding the results made everything feel heavier. When I finally opened the envelope and read the report, the truth came at me in clear, simple numbers that left no room for doubt. My test showed a 99.99% match with Richard Lawson. I was his biological daughter, without question. The next page held Dylan's results. His connection to Richard was 0. No percentage, no possibility. Then the part that confirmed everything my mother had confessed. Dylan's DNA matched Greg Shaw almost perfectly. The lab had compared Dylan's sample with a previous one from Greg that was in their system. Seeing those numbers printed out made everything my family had built their lives around collapse in front of me. For a moment, I just stood there in silence, letting the shock settle. It felt strange to finally understand why my father treated me the way he did. All those years of coldness, suspicion, and distance weren't because of who I was. It was because he feared something about Dylan deep inside himself. He pushed that fear onto me, convincing himself I was the one who didn't belong. The truth was the opposite. Once the initial shock eased, I picked up the phone and called my attorney, Rachel Monroe. I emailed her the results, and she reviewed everything. When she called back, her voice was steady and unmistakably confident. She explained that the wording in the will, the part labeling Dylan as the sole biological son, would work against him now. Because the will relied heavily on biological connection, Dylan's entire inheritance could legally be dismissed. The majority of the estate, by default and by law, would shift to me. Rachel assured me the facts were strong enough to hold up in any dispute. After the call, I sat at my dining table and began preparing for the upcoming Lawson Construction Gala. I put together a 10-slide presentation that laid out the truth in a calm, organized way. I included the DNA results, the key lines from the will, and Rachel's notes explaining the legal impact. I wasn't trying to humiliate anyone. I wanted clarity. I wanted to show the truth exactly as it was, without emotion or exaggeration. I saved the presentation onto several USB drives and uploaded it to secure cloud storage just in case anything got lost or tampered with. I knew my father well enough to expect resistance the moment things didn't go his way. I wasn't going to leave room for excuses. Preparing all of this didn't feel like revenge. It felt like claiming space I had been denied my whole life. For once, I wasn't going to let fear or guilt silence me. The truth was there, undeniable and sharp. And I decided that when the gala arrived, I would let that truth speak for itself. The Lawson Construction Anniversary Gala was one of the biggest events the company had ever hosted. The ballroom was bright, decorated with gold accents, and filled with more than 300 guests. Investors, longtime clients, and board members moved from table to table, greeting each other with smiles. It was meant to be a night of celebration, but for me, the atmosphere felt tense. I had been placed at a far table with distant relatives, nowhere near the front. Dylan, on the other hand, sat in the center at the VIP table beside my parents and the board. It was clear who my father wanted the spotlight on. When the event officially began, Richard stepped up to the podium with his usual confidence. He talked about the company's growth, the future, and the importance of keeping the business under true Lawson leadership. He praised Dylan in front of everyone, calling him the next CEO. People clapped politely, though some looked surprised at how boldly he announced it. Then my father joked about the little DNA talk going around, claiming the situation was already taken care of. His tone made it sound like he expected everyone to move on. But I couldn't stay quiet. When he tried to move to the next part of the program, I got up from my seat and said I had something important to share. especially since he had brought up the subject in public. The room fell silent. A few guests turned their heads, unsure of what was happening. Dylan's expression shifted instantly, and my father stared at me like he wished he could stop me right there. Before Richard could shut me down, Evelyn Brooks, one of the few board members who had always treated me with respect, spoke up. She said that if a concern had been raised publicly, it should be addressed properly. Her words forced my father into a corner. He tried to maintain control of the situation, but refusing would make him look like he was hiding something. After a tense pause, he gave a reluctant nod and allowed me to use the projector. I walked to the front, plugged in the USB drive, and opened the presentation I had prepared. My heart was beating fast, but my voice stayed steady. I started with my own DNA results, showing my confirmed connection to Richard. Then I moved to the next slide, the one that showed Dylan was not biologically related to him. A loud murmur rose from the crowd. People leaned forward, whispering to each other. The next slide displayed the match between Dylan and Greg Shaw. Gasps echoed through the room. Greg was standing in the back near the entrance, and his face went pale. The final slide highlighted the specific line from the will, the part declaring Dylan as the sole biological son. At that point, Elaine stepped forward, shaking and crying. She took the microphone and admitted the truth about the past, her voice breaking as she explained what had happened all those years ago. The room erupted into confusion. Some guests stood, others argued, and board members immediately demanded an emergency meeting. The quiet celebration my father had planned was gone. In its place, the truth filled every corner of the ballroom, leaving the entire company and my family facing consequences they could no longer avoid. The board members moved quickly after the chaos in the ballroom. They escorted my father, Dylan, and me into a private conference room. The doors closed, and the noise of the gala faded behind us. Everyone sat with stiff shoulders and serious faces. No one tried to soften the moment. The truth was already out, and the company's future had to be addressed immediately. The meeting began with the chairman stating that the company needed stability after what had just unfolded. He announced that Richard would be suspended as CEO while an investigation took place. My father tried to argue that the situation was a personal matter, not a business one, but the board didn't accept that. They said trust was essential for leadership, and his actions had created a massive conflict of interest. He went quiet, realizing he couldn't talk his way out of it. Next, the board turned to Dylan. His dismissal from his VP role happened in seconds. There was no debate, no discussion. Without the biological connection my father had insisted on for years, he no longer met the requirements laid out in Richard's own policies. When the decision was finalized, Dylan pushed back from his chair, furious. He said the company couldn't treat him that way, but the board reminded him that his position had always been based on the will's terms, not on merit or accomplishment. Attorney Martin Cole joined the meeting and explained the legal side clearly. Because the will highlighted biological connection, Dylan's claim to the inheritance was now invalid. The documents supported only one child, me. Under the wording Richard had chosen himself, I was the rightful majority shareholder. Martin said the transition would be straightforward, and the company's ownership structure would adjust accordingly. Evelyn Brooks then spoke up. She said the company needed someone capable and steady, someone who understood modern systems and the changes required to keep Lawson Construction competitive. She nominated me to serve as interim CEO. A few board members nodded immediately, and one by one the votes followed. By the end of the motion, I had been officially chosen to lead the company until the final review. My father's face fell as the decision was made. He tried to insist that raising Dylan should count for something, but one of the board members reminded him that he had created the biological requirement in the first place. He had used that logic to justify everything, and now it had turned against him. There was nothing left for him to argue. Dylan stood up suddenly, shaking with anger. He glared at me, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in a single night. He said I had taken his life away from him, that I had waited for the perfect chance to destroy him. Before he could get any closer, security stepped in and guided him out of the room. His yelling faded down the hallway as the doors closed. My mother sat to the side, pale and quiet. She knew what was coming next. The prenup she had signed decades ago included harsh terms for adultery, and now those terms would be enforced. She would lose a large portion of her financial security. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. By the end of the night, everything had shifted. My father and Dylan left the building without their titles, roles, or certainty about their futures. My mother faced a painful fallout of her own. And Dylan, too overwhelmed and furious, cut himself off from both his mother and Greg. His new reality was nothing like the one he had grown up expecting. The life he thought he deserved simply collapsed in front of him, leaving him bitter, alone, and unwilling to face the truth. Meanwhile, I walked out of that room carrying the weight of a new beginning I never imagined, but one I was finally ready to claim. Taking over as CEO felt strange at first. I had spent most of my life being pushed to the edges of the family, so stepping into the center of the company brought a mix of nerves and responsibility. But I knew the business needed a clearer direction, and I knew exactly where to start. The workplace had been shaped by fear, favoritism, and silence for too long. My first goal was to create an environment where real skill mattered more than last names. One of the first changes I made was addressing the leadership team. Many positions had been handed out based on connections, not talent. I reviewed every department, paying attention to the people who had been working hard behind the scenes. That's how I recognized Naomi Flores. She had been Dylan's assistant for years, managing most of his work while receiving none of the credit. After seeing the way she handled problems and kept everything running smoothly, I promoted her to VP of Operations. She earned the role through her dedication, and she quickly became one of the strongest voices in decision-making meetings. With Naomi's help and a team chosen for their experience, not their friendships, the company began to shift. Projects were cleaner, deadlines were met, and the atmosphere improved. Employees no longer felt ignored or afraid to speak up. Their confidence grew, and the company's performance changed almost immediately. Old clients who had been slipping away returned once they saw the new structure. New clients joined because they felt the company was finally stable and dependable. Profits rose steadily, and for the first time in years, Lawson Construction became known for efficiency and fairness instead of internal politics. Outside of work, I wanted to give others the support I never had. I started the Harper Lawson Foundation to help women enter fields where they were often discouraged. The program offered scholarships and mentoring for women studying engineering, architecture, and construction technology. Each time I visited the students, I saw young women who reminded me of myself, focused, ambitious, and hungry for opportunity. While helping others, I also needed to help myself. Years of emotional damage don't disappear overnight. Therapy became a regular part of my week. I talked through the pain of feeling unwanted, the constant comparisons to Dylan, and the confusion of growing up in a household that pretended everything was fine. Slowly, I learned to separate my value from how my family treated me. It was difficult work, but it opened space in my life for healthier relationships. During this time, I met Jason Miller, a kind man who ran a nonprofit that taught coding to kids in underserved communities. He understood the importance of second chances and growth. He never treated me like a headline or a scandal. Instead, he focused on who I was becoming. Talking to him felt easy in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I also began mentoring students personally. One of them, a young girl named Kayla Ortiz, wanted to study engineering but was constantly told it wasn't a girl's field. I shared my story with her. Not the dramatic parts, but the message that hard work and courage mattered more than anyone's doubts. Seeing her eyes light up reminded me why I wanted to build something bigger than myself. As the months passed, the company strengthened, and I did too. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I wasn't the quiet shadow in the Lawson family. I became a leader with a purpose, using my voice not to fix the past, but to build a future where people were valued for their effort and potential, not their bloodline. I kept my meetings with my father limited and structured. After everything that had happened, I knew I couldn't allow him to shift the story or twist my words the way he used to. Once a month, we sat together in a quiet cafe, and I made the rules clear from the start. No pretending the past didn't happen, no trying to take credit for the company's success, and no guilt-tripping. If he wanted to talk, he had to be honest and respectful. He agreed, mostly because he had no other choice. The powerful man who once towered over every room walked in each time looking smaller, older, and tired. The arrogance he used to carry was gone. He knew the limits I set were firm. Dylan never appeared at any of these meetings. He cut himself off from everyone after the truth came out. He refused to speak to my mother, and he wasn't willing to even look at Greg. Instead of trying to rebuild his life, he stayed angry, holding on to the belief that I had destroyed him. He closed every door people tried to open for him, choosing isolation instead of starting fresh. Watching him fall deeper into resentment made me sad, but I knew I couldn't fix what he refused to face. My mother, on the other hand, took a different path. She started therapy and began trying to understand the choices she made. For the first time, she admitted how much fear had controlled her. She tried reaching out to me slowly, carefully, and without pressure. I didn't let her back in easily. I needed boundaries with her too, and she respected them. Our conversations were simple at first. Over time, we found a new way of speaking to each other, one that didn't feel forced or dishonest. As life moved forward, I focused on strengthening the business and the foundation. The company gained a new reputation under my leadership. People didn't talk about the scandal anymore. They talked about our reliability and fairness. We became known for real results and real integrity. The foundation grew as well, giving more women the chance to study fields where they were often overlooked. Seeing the impact of the scholarships reminded me how far I had come from being the daughter constantly pushed aside. Whenever I thought about the past, the irony struck me. I had been treated like an outsider, told directly and indirectly that I didn't belong. Yet I turned out to be the only biological child Richard ever had. The DNA test meant to shame me became the very thing that gave me the strength and clarity I needed. It didn't just clear my name, it changed my life. But as the months passed, I realized the story had shifted in my mind. It was no longer about proving anything to my father or punishing anyone. It wasn't revenge that kept me going. It was justice. It was setting limits. It was choosing myself after years of being pushed aside. For the first time in my life, I finally had what I deserved: respect, stability, and a future I built with my own hands. Do you think I made the right decision by stepping away from the people who spent years tearing me down, or should I have given them another chance? I'd honestly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more.